So, today we're going to dig into a case that on the surface seems pretty straightforward, a horrible poisoning at a dog shelter. But what happens when the only suspect swears he didn't do it? Well, the justice system had to build its case piece by piece, relying on some really careful investigation and circumstantial evidence to get to the truth, all without a confession. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. Think of it like an hourglass. We're going to start broad with the crime itself, then we'll narrow right down into the intense legal fight over the evidence. And then we'll zoom back out to explore what this whole case really tells us about the law and legal strategy. All right, so first things first, let's set the scene. We're going to start with the facts of the case that absolutely no one disputes. This is what we know happened on the afternoon of May 16th, 2022. Now, this timeline, it's absolutely crucial. It was all pieced together from surveillance footage. And what it does is establish this incredibly narrow window of opportunity. It puts the defendant, and only the defendant, at the exact place of the crime, at the exact time it had to have happened. And the result of all this was just heartbreaking. Two dogs, named Mimi and Chow Chow, were found dead. They were the direct victims of the poison. And tragically, 3 other dogs got sick just from ingesting their toxic vomit. So with the defendant insisting he was innocent, the prosecution had, well, a huge hurdle on their hands. You see, with no direct witnesses and absolutely no confession, their entire case had to be built on circumstantial evidence. This is the million-dollar question in so many criminal cases, isn't it? And the court had to figure it out. The answer? Well, it lies in meticulously weaving together all these different threads of indirect evidence until they form a picture so clear, so coherent, that it's just undeniable. So the prosecution basically built its case on 3 key pillars. First, what the camera saw. Second, what the forensic lab found. And third, what the defendant himself said. Or maybe more importantly, how his story just kept changing and falling apart. This isn't just a summary, this is a direct quote from the court's own log of the video evidence. They documented, second by second, the exact moment an object comes flying into the pen, right when the defendant was the only person there, and a dog immediately eats it. And here we go again. The record is incredibly specific. This is the moment the second victim, Cho Cho, ate the poison. Now you might be thinking, did the camera get a clear shot of his face? And the answer is no. But the footage showed the objects coming from his location and the dogs eating them right away, creating this powerful, unbroken chain of events. And then came the science. The lab reports from National Chungshin University were the final definitive proof. They found a super toxic pesticide called Turbufos in both dogs' stomachs. And just look at these numbers. The lethal limit is 0.05 parts per million. They found levels over 100, and in Mimi's case, over 200 times that limit. There was just no question this was a deliberate, deadly poisoning. Okay, so the prosecution feels like they have a pretty solid case, right? They've got the timeline, the video, the lab work, but the defense? Oh, they were not about to give up. This set the stage for a real courtroom battle, where the defense team tried to poke holes in every piece of this circumstantial case. First up, the defense tried to argue about opportunity. They said, hey, this area is wide open. Anyone could have walked up and done it. But the court shot that down. Police confirms that after reviewing all the footage, no one else was seen anywhere near the area. And physically, getting to that exact spot was almost impossible for an outsider. You'd have to get through locked gates or wade through a pretty nasty channel. All right, next, the defense tried to paint a picture of the defendant as this helpful landlord with absolutely no reason to do this. But the court found plenty of evidence of friction. The defendant himself admitted the barking annoyed him and that he'd been bitten. And the real kicker, a documented incident from a year before where he actually went into the shelter with a stick to attack the dogs. That showed a clear pattern of frustration. Then the defense played what they thought was a trump card. The police never found the specific poison, Turbufos, on the defendant's property. But the court looked at this and basically said, well, of course you didn't find it. That's not proof he's innocent, it's what you'd expect a guilty person to do, get rid of the evidence. Plus, they did find other pesticides, proving he had access and knew how to use them. But you know, the real nail in the coffin for the defense might have been the defendant's own words. His story just kept changing. At first, he told the police that, yeah, he did throw something over the fence. Snails he was cleaning out of his pond. But later, in court, he changed his tune completely and denied throwing anything at all. That kind of inconsistency just destroys your credibility. So, with all the evidence lined up and the defense's arguments taken apart one by one, the court found him guilty. But they didn't stop there. They decided to apply a special sentencing enhancement, ruling that the crime was committed under grossly severe circumstances. So, what in the world does that actually mean? So, this part of Taiwan's Animal Protection Act is really for the worst cases. When a court finds that the circumstances were grossly severe, it automatically triggers a much harsher mandatory prison sentence of 1 to 5 years. It's meant to be a serious deterrent for the most awful crimes against animals. And the court really laid out its thinking here, step by step. First, they pointed out the special bond people have with dogs. Second, they highlighted the massive potential for harm. Throwing poison into a pen with 30 dogs could have been a massacre. Third, they condemned the method itself, calling the use of a potent pesticide extremely cruel. And finally, they circled back to his prior attack with the stick as evidence of a total disregard for animal life. But here's where it gets complicated. Was the court actually right to do this? Not everyone thinks so. Professor Lin Mingqiang, a legal expert from National Taiwan University, pointed out that grossly severe is a really vague term in the law. He basically asked, did this case, with a first-time offender who has a low level of education, really fit the high standard that lawmakers were thinking of when they wrote this law? It's a fair question. And that really leads us to the final piece of this puzzle, which isn't so much about guilt or innocence, but about legal strategy and consequences. Because the defendant insisted he was innocent through 3 separate trials, all the way to the Supreme Court, and Professor Lin's analysis here raises this fascinating what-if. By pleading not guilty and fighting it all the way, the defendant went for an all-or-nothing strategy. And when he lost, that grossly severe finding meant prison time was mandatory. Professor Lin wonders what might have happened if he'd taken a different path. If he had admitted guilt early on, maybe shown some remorse, he could have potentially negotiated for suspended sentence and avoided prison altogether. So the case is closed. The verdict's in, the appeals are done. But it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? It makes you think about the incredible challenge of proving a case with only breadcrumbs of evidence, about how subjective the idea of cruelty can be in the eyes of the law, and about how a defendant's legal strategy can be just as important as the facts in deciding their ultimate fate.